But despite the number of conferences and the number of exciting materials and ideas and conversations we've had, maybe at this conference or elsewhere, or the number of wonderful books we've read, somehow classrooms do not seem to change. Yeah? Just one quote here, if you can bear with me. I'll read it for you if you can't see. One quote which I think represents a more widespread sentiment, and that quote, I can actually see it here, so I don't need to turn around. So if I keep doing it, can you just shout at me and say, okay, good. So this teacher, she is a Slovakian teacher who participated in a specific teacher development course, and that teacher development course was focused on how to motivate learners in the language classroom. So the whole course was about learner motivation. And at the end of this course, well, that was part of my research. That's what Linda was referring to earlier. That was my research when I looked at what these teachers, how they actually worked with those ideas in the classroom. And for specific teachers, I noticed that although they seemed to embrace the ideas, somehow when I was in their classroom, there was almost no relationship between this. And then I asked this teacher directly, why do you think this is the case? And the teachers were not obliged to do anything. So it was not a problem. It was just an interesting question for me. They were not assessed, they were not supervised, and I did not expect them to change anything if they did not feel it was appropriate to do so. Okay, so I think that's quite important to mention. And this teacher, at the end of this course, she tells me this. The trainer, when she speaks about it, it's so clear, I'm so enthusiastic that if they asked me to do something, I would do it. But as soon as the door closes, and I'm at home, gone. I think that maybe I'm not enthusiastic enough. Maybe I'm not convinced about it. They work using those methods and they are successful, but maybe I'm not that convinced about it, so I don't go for it. And maybe it's the same with this teacher development course, she told me. Yes, this is true, I agree. We should do it this way, but then you return home and you say to yourself, it's much more comfortable to do it the old way. Hands up if you know the feeling. Okay? That's quite familiar, right? We've all been there. And I would like to tell you one thing. We've all been there, and there's nothing wrong with us. Okay? Nothing wrong with us at all. Okay? This is something that happens. We know that teachers don't change just because we expose them to interesting materials. Just like learners don't always learn what we teach them. Right? Exactly the same sort of scenario. So in my talk, I want to understand, why this is the case. And let me just borrow words from TS Eliot. This comes from his unpublished essay. He wrote this when he was 26. It took me many more years to actually come up with some suggestions for, why teachers don't usually change. T.S. Eliot just wrote it like that without having to do any research, spending any money, having to go to... that's efficiency for you. But anyway, all significant truths are private truths. They must be made mine before they can be true for me. And this is what my talk is about. How can we help teachers, or indeed help ourselves, to make the truth, and I use that term very loosely, to make all the ideas mine, so that they can then influence the way I teach, and they can then influence the kinds of experiences I create for my learners in the language classroom. So that is the ultimate goal of my research and of my talk today. And many have tried to kind of come up with proposals and suggestions. So for example, Rod Ellis suggested this. Rodel is, typical second language acquisition researcher, and I'm sure many of you have heard lots of theories and research that he has done, and you know this name. I'm sure it sounds, it kind of rings a bell for most of you. But, there have been especially from the camp of teachers, this kind of, okay, but second language acquisition research, too far away from the language classroom. There's this divide between theory, research, and practice. And Rodel is actually suggested that in order to bridge that gap, we need to ask two questions. And the first one is, how can researchers' technical knowledge be made available to teachers in such a way that it can impact on their teaching? So it's not that, we do research on how students learn, and that's great, and we've got all these wonderful theories, but how can we make this available to teachers in such a way that they can make it their own? Yeah, that's the question. So there are very good signs that researchers are very seriously thinking about this issue. But the second question is what I'm interested most in at this time, in this particular presentation, and that is, how can what teachers know and do, what they already know and do, inform the theories that researchers seek to build? And that is what I want to be doing. That is what my research has been about, looking at what teachers are doing in the classroom and trying to understand why they do what they do, so that as a teacher educator, as a tutor on our MA TEFL program, for example, I can help them to make these truths their own. Okay?